Hi everybody, this is part 3 of my bottom shelf vinyl voyage. Don't worry if you've not seen the first 2 parts, this is not a continuing drama with a plot line, but the other 2 episodes are available to watch. What am I doing here? Well, basically this bottom shelf, where I keep my vinyl, is all my non-Beatles related stuff, and I've just been going on a voyage to listen to the whole thing from start to finish, so that everything gets its chance. That we buy these things and they get forgotten about if you don't play them. So I'm going to be showing you what's coming next in my vinyl voyage. The last episode we did the letter D. This is E through to L. We will actually kick off with Led Zeppelin at the start of the next episode, but we'll start the L's today. So this is, while we wait for some Beatles news, which I don't think will be far away now. I know I've said that before, but fingers crossed. In here, in this pile, I've got my personal albums of the decade for the past 2 decades. We're going to be showing those as part of this. So let's just take a leisurely stroll through. Of course, as always, I'd love to see your comments on any of this stuff that I've got here. So the first one up, we finished the D's, we're now on to E. Erasure, their first album, The Circus from 1986. So in 1986, I'd just been a teenager for a short while, and this was a massively important band for me at the time. I just loved the pop that they were producing for several years. I think through to up to and including the ABBA-esque EP, which was in about, 92, 93, which I still say was largely responsible for kicking off the whole ABBA revival. I think that had a big part to play in it. But anyway, it's got their big sort of first hit single Sometimes on it. It doesn't have to be Victim of Love. This is just packed with great sort of synth 80s pop all the way throughout, and I think Vince Clarke doesn't get the recognition that he deserves for the fact that he was sort of one of the main songwriters for early Depeche Mode, and then he had his whole his career with Yazoo, with Alison Moyet, and then to do Erasure as well after that. I think he's one of this country's greats, and I don't think he gets the recognition that he deserves. Fantastic album. This is a very special album for me, Touch by Eurythmics. I've still got the cassette of this, and that cassette was the first album I ever bought with my own money. And I've never really stopped listening to this album on a regular basis for 40 years. Again, it's another synth classic. Before Annie Lennox sort of went into sort of full... Before we realised sort of what a great singer of more traditional pop she was, they were just a great synth pop band. And this album, Here Comes the Rain Again, Who's That Girl, being the sort of 2 most well-known songs on here, and Right By Your Side. Paint a Rumour at the end is, turn that up loud, and it is just an absolutely fantastic song. I will never stop loving this album. Absolutely fantastic. And following it up is, I think, probably the oldest piece of vinyl that I own in terms of how long I've had it. I bought this very piece of vinyl brand new back in 1985. This is Eurythmics' Be Yourself Tonight. This was the follow-up to Touch. I think it was the follow-up to Touch. I'm sure it was anyway. Would I Lie to You? Great pop song on there. And It's Alright Baby's Coming Back was absolutely one of my favourite songs of that whole mid-80s period. It's not an album that I would play as often as I play Touch, but being for the fact that I have owned this piece of vinyl for 38 years, longer than any other, very special place in my heart for that. Oh, we then move on to an absolutely classic album. I think that this is probably, in the genre of folk rock, this is my absolute favourite album. Fairport Convention, Liege and Leaf. I don't really talk much about my love of folk music. I've got a big collection of folk music on CD, not so much on vinyl. In fact, very little on vinyl. But this, I'm only really interested in Fairport Convention whilst Sandy Denny was in the band. Because I'm a big Sandy Denny fan, and with what she did with Fairport Convention, and then Fotheringay afterwards, and then her solo career, I've kind of followed her most of the way through her unfortunately short career that she had. But this is a wonderful album of really great musicians. This was an album born of tragedy with a bus crash that they had around the time of this album that unfortunately took the lives of one of the members of the band. But it's a superb album. If you've not heard that, I would really recommend it. Also by Fairport Convention, Unhalfbricking. I believe, am I right in saying that that's Sandy Denny's parents on the front cover? I think. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't like this as much as Legion Leaf, but it has got a few great songs on it. I think Autopsy and Who Knows Where the Time Goes are the standout tracks on this album. Very much Fairport Convention in their Bob Dylan inspired phase. They seem to be inspired by the Basement Tapes era material, some of which makes its way onto here. That's my absolute least favourite period of Bob Dylan is the Basement Tapes. Not a fan of that at all, but I do like the Unhalfbricking by Fairport Convention. Let me just show you, before we move on to the next album, which is one of my albums of the decade. Just show you this. If I remember rightly, this is a lovely... Oh, look at the colour of that. Look at the colour of that. It actually looks lighter on camera with the light shining on it. It's a very, very bold pink, is that. But a nice bit of vinyl. So yes, album of the decade. Now, this is for the decade of the 2000s, the noughties. When I did a ranking at the end of the decade, this came out number 1. I'll show you the back cover, see if you can guess it from that. There's the back cover. I'll even show you the middle before I tell you what it is, in case you can guess. Do you know what this is? This is the debut album by Fleet Foxes, Seattle band. And the first time I heard this album, which wasn't on vinyl, I had the CD for many years before I picked up this vinyl. Just this album, I played it so much. The opening track, Sun It Rises, is... I tried to think of what it reminded me of the first time I heard it, and all I could think of was Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, if been sung by a group of Gregorian monks. Very, very confusing. So whereas Fairport Convention would be very much sort of British-inspired folk, this is more Americana folk, but a wonderful album, great harmonies throughout, and there's very little that's electric on here. It's mainly acoustic, but just a wonderful album from start to finish. And yeah, I named it my album of the decade, and all these years later I see no reason to change that. For the 2000s, that's the one for me. We then move on to, I would say, one of the most important albums of my life. In fact, I listened to this just last night in my car when I had about an hour's drive home, and I listened to this album. The Housemartins, Londonderry Hull 4 from 1986. 1986 is my favourite year of pop music. I just have a real deep love for that year. There's the track listing there. Kicks off with Happy Hour, of course, their classic sort of big debut single. And I followed the Housemartins through their unfortunately short career. Would have loved to have seen them gone on longer. But then, of course, Paul Heaton went on to form the Beautiful South, had massive success with them, enjoyed loads of their songs. And in more recent years, Paul Heaton and Jackie Abbott being from the Beautiful South, they've put out some great stuff as well, one of which I'm going to show you soon. But this is, if I was going to do the top 10 most important albums of my life, which actually I think I did do a video on that once, now that I mention it, this was in there, and it still would be, and it always will be. It's an album that I absolutely adore. And then the follow-up from, I think it was late 1987 when this came out, The People Who Grin Themselves to Death. Their second and final studio album. They've got some good compilations as well, but I remember buying this on the day of release. These records aren't going to stand up on the side of me, they're going to keep falling over. I bought it on the day of release. I remember it was one of those where I bought it from Woolworths in the morning, but I wasn't going to be home until tea time. I had hours to play, and it was one of those where I was just sort of reading the sleeve notes all day, reading the lyrics, and I was so eager to play it. And when there's the song Build on here, I have never loved a song on first hearing as much as Build from this album. I just fell in love with that song. the first time I heard it and never stopped loving it since. I went to see them on their tour of this. One of the last gigs that they ever did in my hometown of Bridlington. And that was the first proper gig I ever went to, was the House Martins. And you know, I've loved them ever since. So then we've got, it's out of order alphabetically, but it comes after my House Martin albums deliberately because it is Paul Heaton and Jackie Abbott. This was, I think was this their second album, I think. But I got this one on vinyl because this was the one that to me had the best collection of songs on it. Some of them are just Paul Heaton singing. So there's the occasional one like on here, Sundial in the Shade, which is just Jackie Abbott singing. But together their voices just go so well together, and Paul Heaton is still writing fantastic pop tunes, sort of nearly 40 years after the first hits. He's still doing the business. I'm going to give up with those albums because they just keep falling over. Next is an album that I regret not owning 25, 30 years earlier than I did own it, and it's Dare by Human League. So when Don't You Want Me came out as a single for Christmas 1981, I got the single for Christmas. I've still got that single actually, and it's one of my favourite pop songs of all time. So I really enjoyed what they were putting out as singles, but for some reason, and I don't know why, I never got around to getting the album until probably not much more than about 10 years ago. And this is honestly one of the most what's the word I shall use? Emotional albums I've ever heard. And for something that's sort of a very cold synth album, I think it's surprising to get that kind of emotion from it. But honestly, the opening side of this album, The Things That Dreams Are Made Of, Open Your Heart, Sound of the Crowd, Darkness, Do or Die, it's just, I don't know many better albums or sides of an album than that. And then it carries on with, I Am the Law and Seconds. It just does something to me, this album, that pretty much no other album does. And the weird thing is, at the end, you've got the sort of two of the big singles, Love Action, and then the big single, Don't You Want Me, at the end of the album. And despite the fact that, like I said, Don't You Want Me is one of my favourite pop songs of all time, it's a bit out of place. It's a bit too poppy and happy, I think, for this album. It doesn't quite sound as though it belongs on here. But it's just an incredible album, is that? And I just wish I'd got to know it a lot sooner. Iron Maiden, The Number of the Beast. So I picked this up, I think, was it last year or early this year, Record Store Day? I think it was Record Store this year when I went to get Red Rose Speedway and I saw this. I thought I'll have this as well. So I've got The Number of the Beast single on blood red vinyl that I bought in about 1982 or 1983 up in Scotland. And I've always loved that song because my favourite films as a kid were the Omen films. So having a song called The Number of the Beast was sort of fitted in nicely with that. So that and Run to the Hills are probably my two favourite Iron Maiden songs. I don't own any other Iron Maiden albums. I only know a few other Iron Maiden songs. But Number of the Beast and Run to the Hills are the reasons that this drew me in. And also, just what an amazing album cover that is. It's always worth me having that up on the wall sometimes so that I can see it, because I do love that. Next off, it's the first album by Joe Jackson. This is one of the key reasons why I'm doing this Bottom Shelf Final Voyage, is for albums like this, because I bought this probably a year ago and I don't think I've played it yet. I really don't. So I'm trying not to let these things get forgotten about, because I paid the princely sum of £4.99 for this album. I need to get my money's worth. But I grew up knowing 4 Joe Jackson songs, which was Is She Really Going Out With Him, Different for Girls, Stepping Out and Jumping Jive. And I think it must have just been from hearing them on the radio, because I didn't own them on any cassettes or any albums. Maybe I'd seen it on TV, but I always knew those songs really well. So I think it must have been from radio. Only one of those songs is on here, and that's Is She Really Going Out With Him. So really the rest of the album is unknown to me. And that's why I need to make sure I don't forget about things like this that I've paid money for, so that I don't forget it. So I'm really looking forward to getting to that one. so that I can learn a few more Joe Jackson songs. Okay, next up. So I've got 2 copies of this album. The next copy that I'll show you after this is a very contentious and controversial release. But this is, I believe, an original pressing or an original UK pressing of Thriller. Obviously a classic album, of course it is. And this sounds really good. Want to be starting something, just has always been my favourite song on this album. But I think the 3-song run of Thriller, Beat It, Billie Jean is, I don't think that's often been surpassed as a 3-song run on an album. Just absolutely incredible. What are our thoughts on The Girl Is Mine? It's alright, it's there, it exists. It's never going to be my favourite Paul McCartney song or my favourite Michael Jackson song, but it was nice to see that they had that little period in the 80s where they were all buddies before it all went badly wrong. But I would probably play this now as a contrast to the next version, just to sort of see the difference. This next version is the one that came out, I think, probably about just under a year ago. This is the Mobile Fidelity version. This is the most money I've ever paid for a single disc album. I'm certain of that. It is. Very, very controversial release. This is the album. This release nearly broke Mobile Fidelity as a company, with the revelation of for years them claiming things to be what they call one step, so direct from the master tape, direct to a stamper. And the questions were raised as a result of this being a 40,000 copy run. Well, how can you run the tape once and create a stamper that you print 40,000 records from when you can get far less? You can't get that many copies from a stamper. So it led to questions that led ultimately to Mobile Fidelity admitting that they'd been lying for many, many years, and they can't really come back and have a go at anybody for saying that they were lying, because it's true, it's been proven they were lying. So I'd ordered this a year ago and I cancelled my order because I was annoyed at being lied to. But the fact is that this was recorded from the master tape digitally, phenomenally high resolution digitally, DSD 256 I believe this is. Yeah, DSD 256 is crazy high resolution. And it is amazing. It really is amazing. So I ended up buying this a few months ago after it had been out a while. And they've taken a layer of compression off this album that was always there in previous versions, that was added in the mastering phase. But because they went back to the original tapes and then kind of remastered it, they were able to not have that compression applied to this. And it sounds very different, but it sounds phenomenal. And it is the greatest version of that album I think you're ever going to hear. So I am really glad that I got it, even though I didn't like being lied to by Mobile Fidelity. The scoundrels they are. Next up, Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, their first album. And it's great, is this. I mean, you've got to, if you're in the right mood for it, then this is going to blow your mind. It's very much the sort of new generation continuing, probably the kind of stuff that Bowie had been doing in his Berlin era, but then done by a younger generation. The one thing that really annoys me with New Order and Joy Division and a few other bands is, why on earth do they make it so difficult to know which side to play? So look at that. That's the record there. There's the other side. What am I meant to put on first? I have no idea. There's no track listings on there. It doesn't say side A or side B. I've ended up having to write that on the inner sleeve to tell me. So it's all very well Joy Division and New Order and various other bands being all sort of arty and enigmatic with your information on your albums, but it's an absolute pain in the backside for the listener, and I wish they'd stop doing it. That's my little rant over with. So yeah, that's a fantastic album. again, this next one comes under the heading of why I want to do this journey, because this one's kind of got forgotten about a little bit. The follow-up album, Closer, which I don't really know very well, to be honest. So I'm looking forward to playing Unknown Pleasures, and then I'll make sure that I go straight to this the night after when I'm doing this journey, because I haven't got as far as this yet. I'm still on. Where am I actually up to at the moment? I'm still on the C's in terms of what I'm actually playing. I'm at the Charlatans at the moment, which we did back in video 1. Okay, we've only got 3 or 4 more for this episode of the Bottom Shelf Final Voyage. But there is still another album of the decade in here to come. So, not this one, but this is a great album. King Crimson, In the Court of the Crimson King. I think I probably bought this about 18 months ago, maybe. And it does sound really good. It was surprisingly cheap. I got it for about £16 or something like that. But a really great experimental album of the time. It sort of mixes elements of jazz and progressive rock and various things. 21st Century Schizoid Man, which opens the album, is a great song. And there's a song further on, Moonchild. That's it, Moonchild, opening up side 2, which is a sort of real lovely, gentle song that I do enjoy an awful lot. But again, I've still got quite a lot to learn about this album. So again, I'm looking forward to getting to it when it gets its turn. You know, everything can't have its turn at the same time, can it? There's just too much of this stuff to go through. Another album that I do really enjoy is Autobahn by Kraftwerk. And by far I prefer the title track, Autobahn. Just an epic song, sort of emulating a ride along the Autobahn and the various sounds and things that might happen along a journey, and the way that they create that is beautiful on this album. I think, was this a blue vinyl, I think. So again, I don't know the rest of the album as well as I know the title track, because the title track is one that I knew pretty well before I bought this on vinyl, maybe a couple of years ago I think I got this. So I'm still getting to know the other tracks on there, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. Or shall I? No, I won't. I do like I'd like to get to know more Kraftwerk. So actually, if anybody's got any recommendations of what should I do next on Kraftwerk after this album, I would love to hear from you. 2 albums to go. We're still not at the album of the decade, one that I mentioned, but actually this one isn't far off. Jeez, whoa, I've just noticed something on here that I hadn't seen before. I'll show you that in a minute. Flipping heck. Anyway, this is the second album by Kula Shaker, Peasants, Pigs and Astronauts. This album came out in 1999 and I bought it on CD on the day of release because I'm a big Kula Shaker fan. In fact, Crispian Mills, the lead singer of Kula Shaker, son of Haley Mills, grandson of Sir John Mills, he's probably the person that I've seen live more than anybody else. Whether it's in Kula Shaker or another band called the Jeevers that he had for a while, or even a solo show that I saw, which I don't think he's done much of over the years. I've probably seen him live more than anybody else. But anyway, second album, Peasants, Pigs and Astronauts, came out in 1999. And this reminds me of, you remember the scare around the end of the millennium with the Millennium Bug, and is everything going to fall over and are we all going to die, the plane's going to fall out of the sky, and there's all that panic. This album sort of summons up that end of the millennium feeling, and is this it? Is it all about to end? And it's fantastic, and I absolutely love this. But the thing that shocked me that I saw a couple of minutes ago, and I picked this up that I've not noticed before, I bought this a couple of years ago on the Music on Vinyl label. I think I paid about just over £20 for this, which I was really happy with, and it sounds amazing. But look at that I've just spotted. $550? Is that what it was originally up for sale for? I mean, I'm not misreading that, am I? Wow, interesting. There's a story there. But anyway, this sounds really good, and it sounds so much better than my CD copy, which I've always loved. But I really love that album. One more album to go, and this is This is my album of the decades for the 2010s. I decided to start the L's. I said we're going to start with Led Zeppelin at the next episode of this, but I thought I'll throw in the first L here. This is LCD Sound System, American Dream. And what would this be? It's at least their third or fourth album, maybe even more. I'm not quite sure. I've got a couple other albums from before this, but this one is, what an absolute ride this is. This is a double album. So LCD Sound System from Brooklyn, New York, and this album's got elements of sort of early 80s Cure, Talking Heads. It's very much of that kind of thing. It's got quite a lot of influences in here. You could hear a bit of late 70s Bowie in there as well. But there's some great songs. There's not a Duff track on here, but the song Call the Police, which is sort of about 2/3 of the way through the album, is one of my favourite songs of the last few years. It's got some really simple chord changes, but the way that it uses those chord changes has got such impact, and I absolutely love it. I'd like to go and see this band live. I never have seen them live, but I imagine they put on a really good show. So yeah, for the 2010s, that was my album of the decade. So that is my Bottom Shelf Vinyl Voyage episode 3. The other 2 episodes are available to watch. There'll be links just here if you want to go and see those if you've not done already. I'll be back very soon from an interesting Beatles-related location. I'll see you soon. Bye.